Hello everyone. So in our last video we started talking about working with files in Python, and in this video we're going to look at manipulating and working with files a little more in Python. So we're going to start out here by examining writing to a file in Python, and we're going to do an example of that in a really kind of specific sort of way. Last time we kind of introduced the concept of working with files in Python, what a file is, why we use a file, and one of the purposes of using a file is for persistence. And if we want to have persistent data in a program, we're going to have to be able to write to our file. And so writing to a file is sort of crucial. So in order to write into a file in Python, we need to open that file in either W mode for write, A mode for append, or exclusive creation mode, which is the X. And when we get to our demonstration in just a moment, we'll actually use that exclusive creation mode to do what we're going to do. But we need to be careful with the W mode. We need to be careful with that W mode because we mentioned it the last time, right? Because when we use that W mode, whatever we write to the file will actually completely overwrite everything that was in that file previously. So if we write something new to the file, then it'll take everything that was in the file before and get rid of it and put whatever new thing that we write to it. So anything that we want to, if we want to add to an existing file, we need to open our files in A mode or append mode, because we want to keep that previous data. If we're doing something where we can override all that previous data and erase all that previous data, then we can use the W mode and be okay with it. But when we're writing a string or a sequence of bytes for binary files, this is done using our write method. And this method returns the number of characters that is written to the file. So what I'd like to do is just kind of jump over to our demonstration file here, and we're using the exact same demonstration file that we are using the last time. This is the exact same thing that we were using the last time we were kind of getting acquainted with, opening and working with a file in Python. And so for this time, we're going to try to not only write to a file, but create a file and write to that file. So we talked about last time how if we use a file in our REPL online IDE, we drag it into this pane over here. And whenever we drag it into that pane, it's like we're able to use it in the root directory of our file. So we're going to create a file. So let's jump into our program here. We'll zoom right in so you all can see it just a little bit better. And in my try block here, I'm going to add a variable g, and I'm going to set that to open a file that doesn't currently exist. We're going to create this file with our exclusive creation mode and write to it as we do it. So we're going to create a file. We're going to call it newFile.txt. And we're going to set this file to open in our X mode, which is our exclusive creation mode. Now, for the time being, just so we can kind of avoid all of this other stuff, I'm going to just kind of comment out everything that's related to our previous file that we were using, just so we can work with this new file. And I'm going to add a for loop here, and we're just going to write a countdown into our G file. So we're just going to start a for I in range 1, 11. So for I in the range 1 to 11, so we're just going to count from 1 to 10 in our file. So we're going to reference our object there, that our G dot write. Since we're using numbers here, we'll typecast them into a string, I, and we'll line break by concatenating that with a new line character. And so that's all we need to do to kind of write to our file, is use that write method, that write function, to write whatever we want to write to our file after we create our file. And then so when we're done with that, we can close our file, right like that. And so that's all we really need to do to have a little proof of concept for writing to a file with Python. So, this would be a good place to kind of pause so you could kind of get caught up here, just so you could kind of see what we're working with here. But when I click run here, you'll see in our console window nothing will really happen, but you'll see something unique happen in this left-hand window over here that we don't normally see happen in our usual programming demonstrations. So let's check this out. So nothing happened in our window on the right-hand side, as we mentioned, but on this left-hand pane, we saw this new file.txt just pop up and get created out of nowhere. And I promise you, I didn't manipulate the video. I didn't edit the video. This is one take, right? So and if we click this to see what's going on inside of this file, there are our numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And we have an extra line break there at the end because of the fact that we were writing string I plus a new line break. So we created this new file here, and added the text to it. So that's pretty neat, and we can basically do that with whatever we want. And now, since this file exists, if we wanted to do stuff to it from here, we might want to add to it in A mode or append mode. And from here, I can have it open in append mode, which I just changed the X from X to A. Since the file has already been created, it's already in my workspace here. So now if I just run this again, we can see nothing happened in the console again. But now if I click on my file again, we can see that it's added and gone through and added the numbers again. And each time that I click run, since it's in append mode now, it's going to append the numbers 1 through 10 into my file again. So we just did that several times over and over and over again, just so you can see this at work. Right, and we still have that extra little blank line on the end there from where we're adding that new line. And this is a persistent file, so if I close this program and then come back to it later, I'll still have this file here with my 60 lines of numbers counting from 1 to 10. So it's pretty easy and pretty simple. So now from here, as we get ready to go into our next example, I'm going to do some more selective commenting here just to get ourselves prepped. We'll comment out what we were just doing because we're done with that as we go back to our slide presentation to talk a little bit more about reading files in Python. So in our first video, our last video that you looked at, we looked at one way that we can, we use read mode, get the data out of our file, right? And that was good. We were able to get that data out of there, and we could read that file from the data that we pulled out of there. And because of what we learned in the last file, we know already that in order to read a file in Python, we must open the file in reading mode, which is that R mode that we looked at previously. And, there are various methods that we can use to kind of read the different lines. We can use the read size method to return, to read in the size number of data. So if the size parameter is not specified, it reads and returns up to the end of the file. So it just reads the entire file for us. So that's one thing that we can do. Once the end of that file is reached, we get an empty string on further seeking. So we can head back over here, and we can kind of see that in action. So the last time, if you'll remember, we did this for line nf print line. We can get something similar if we just write a print f.read and leave that size empty. We're on the wrong level of our indentation here, so we need to back out of that. And so if we run that, we get our entire practice file, and that's our practice.txt there, which, remember, if you remember back from our last video, it's just some lorem ipsum dummy text. But we can also do some other stuff with this. So now that we have f created, we can start to manipulate this in a little different way. We can use another method that is the read lines method. So we can create data. We can create a variable. We can call it data, or we can call it whatever we want, and set that to f.readLines. And now what this does is it creates a list of the different lines that are located in my file. And this actually helps us pick apart our file a little more, and we can actually use the methods that we use with lists to kind of help us work with our files in this sort of way. So I could use, I could print data with the list location of 1, or probably would be better to print the list location of 0 to get that very first paragraph from my file. If we print it with the list location of 1, it gives us a blank line, because if we go back and we look at our file, we have an empty line between our paragraphs. So our next actual content paragraph would be data with the list location of 2. And then we could like take this and like we could do things even more. Like we could say data list location 0 equals data list location 0 dot split. Let's try this. I haven't tried this yet. Let's just try it and see what it does. So no error. Let's see what it prints out when we're done. Like if it prints out what I think it should print out. Yes, perfect. So now we've taken, since we split, we used our split text manipulation method that we talked about previously on the string that was located in data index location 0. That turned that index location 0 into a sublist of all of the different terms inside of that sublist. So now we can actually search that sublist for particular words, or we can do more manipulation with that, or we could do all sorts of stuff with that. We have a lot of possibilities of what we can do here with this read lines method. So we can read to read the whole file, we can read lines to read part of the file, and in reading lines we can use, since it is just giving us a list, we can use that same sort of enhanced for loop for line in data, print line. We can do the same thing where we can print all of the lines. Now in this case, since we split out that first line, it still looks like its own subarray, but all the other lines look regular. Now, one of the things to note is even though we've split this first subarray, since we haven't written that back to the file isn't changed. The file is still the way that it was. So we can manipulate data in the file without actually manipulating the file in order to keep that primary data source intact and working the way that we might expect it to work in the future so that we don't actually break anything. You know, if we're working with data, we can work with it temporarily while still having a persistent long-term data source where if we mess something up and break something, we can still kind of wipe it clean and kind of go back to our primary source, just so long as we don't overwrite anything in our file. So that's pretty good, you know. So that's pretty beneficial. So those are some other ways that we can read things in our files. And really, for the scope of this course, for getting started, I mean, now that you know this, you know, we can basically use the things that we know from the past and let past successes kind of inform our future successes. Because, I mean, really what we're talking about from here, now that we kind of know how to take data from a file, bring it into our active programming environment, and kind of break it down into things that we can work with, like list items and things of that nature. You know, we're talking about list functions, we're talking about string manipulation, we're talking about data operations, you know, calculations, things of that sort of nature. So all of this stuff is just a different way on the front end that just brings our data in, where we can still do the same things that we've kind of learned how to do already up to this point, with other things that we've learned. That's why I kind of put this where it's at in the course. Right? Like, we don't have to, you know, like, we've already learned most of the stuff that we need to know in order to work with the files, because all we really need to know to work with the files is really how to get them in. And once we get them in, we take our list functions that we learned in the last module. We take our string manipulation functions that we learned previously. We take our, you know, just our basic mathematic functions and stuff that we did early on in the semester. You know, everything of that nature. We can take all of that and we can put it together, and we can actually use this file for the common, you know, for good, and be able to get the data out of it and utilize it and make sense of it. And that's great. You know, we don't have to learn a whole bunch of new stuff here. You know, we're learning just a few little things and then kind of combining them with other things that we've learned previously to put them into a whole new zone of things that we know. So once we kind of get all of that, you know, we kind of look and see, well, okay, well, we've got these Python file methods. And there aren't really a ton of Python file methods out there, and there aren't really that many of them that, for the scope of our course, that we really need. You know, there are various methods that work with the file object. And, you know, we used some of these previously. And on the next slide, I have a fairly comprehensive list of Python file methods. And you see them here. And this is like a screen in the video that you can kind of screenshot, save to your notes. But you can see, like, okay, we've used close, we've used read, we've used read lines. You can use read line as the singular if you just want to return one line from the file. We've used write. You can use write lines in a similar way that we've used read lines, if you wanted to use it that way. But we also saw how we could use write with a for loop and just use the write function in that sort of way. And, you know, some of these are kind of bigger than, like, what we would want to talk about in the span of this course. Like the things that have to do with the write buffer of the file stream and the interactive nature of the file stream. like the file, the file descriptor, the binary buffer. You know, we don't have to worry about those sorts of things. You know, sometimes using seek and tell can be beneficial, and you know, I might encourage you to go out and look up those on your own. But by and large, we really don't have to use those if we can take advantage of some of the stuff that we already know. So this is pretty beneficial to us here. You know, we've kind of seen proof of concept examples of how we can bring files in and pull files into lists, and then we already know how to work with lists. So we see this kind of functioning from here. So I think this is a pretty good proof of concept that kind of shows us where we can go with working with lists. So as far as that goes, that's all that I have for you for this video. Thank you for watching.